Monica Boudreau, welcome to WorkPlay Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited that we get to finally chat about all things marketing and branding.
I know, I'm so excited too because we had actually met at an event, correct?
Yes, New York City at the Maison event.
That's exactly where. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I love this girl's energy. She obviously is a wealth of knowledge. So the next obvious step is to have you on the podcast for all of the WorkPlay members to hear about all of your amazing expertise. But first, before we go into everything, I would love for you just to tell us who you are, your business, how long you've been in business.
I'm the founder and CEO of Posh Media. We are a multi-award winning Canadian marketing agency, and we've been in business for 6-year mark this year. And we are brand builders. So we help either new businesses or personal brands kind of forge their brand identity. Or we also work with established brands and businesses to give them a rebirth, a new wave of business as they step into this next stage. Either a new CEO is coming in or they have big business goals that they want to fulfill. Typically, a rebrand is needed.
This is so interesting because when someone's like branding, I feel like the next question is, what does that mean? Right? It's like brand is this huge umbrella. So, in your lens, what is building brands and rebrands? What does the word brand even mean and what does it entail?
Typically, people associate brand with logo, but it's so much more than a logo. It's your messaging, it's your brand voice and tone, it's your visuals beyond your logo. So, what are the colors, the fonts, the aesthetic? What's your photo style as well? If you're doing a brand shoot, like what's the photography style that you're going for? So, it's so much more. It's essentially your think about it as an individual or as a person. How do they make you feel? How do they smell? What aroma do they release? That's exactly what we bring to a brand. So it's definitely way more than a logo.
I know. That's why I'm so passionate about branding because there's so many facets of it. And it's almost like the foundation of marketing in general. And I just don't think people realize how powerful it is until they probably have a brand, which I'm sure you see a lot when you do a transformation with someone. So I'm interested to know, like, how does brand connect with making more money, whether it's marketing or just internally? How do those two things compute together?
This is a great question, and it's one that I often have with our clients actually internally. Oftentimes, a business owner will want to directly relate an ROI to a marketing effort or any type of business expense, right? Or business investment. But when it comes to branding, it's really on a long term basis where you don't necessarily see the ROI on a rebrand right away, but over time, with brand awareness and brand recognition, that is when you start to see the ROI of branding. And in the long term, you get to actually measure the ROI in terms of how many new sales or how many new clients are coming in because they get to recognize your brand without your logo on top. So if you think like Nike, this is a very obvious example, but you just need the swoosh. You don't need the Nike written below it, or sometimes you'll see the visual, you know it's a Nike ad.
Yes, and I totally agree with this. It's like almost like a compounding strategy. And so when you say long term, what does that mean? Does that mean 1 year, 2 years, 5 years?
It depends on like the type of rebrand and also what are the business goals and what are the marketing initiatives in play, right? So if you just do a rebrand and you do nothing else after, you sit on it, well, it's definitely going to take a whole lot of years to actually get the word out there, right? But if you have an active marketing strategy, you produce content, you share content with your community as well, then the ROI can be much quicker. And sometimes it can be months, sometimes it can be years. It very much varies.
That makes a lot of sense. I think, like, just thinking in terms of the audience and maybe something that they might struggle with is like, well, what do I do first, right? Brand is such an overarching umbrella of various things. I think it can be really hard to understand, well, like, what do I start on first? I know that this is compounding strategy, but is there a checklist or like, I need to do this first or prioritize this when it comes to brand? What have you seen over the years?
Before undergoing like a strategic brand development, I would really understand what your business is and who your audience is. And that's really going to propel and set the tone in terms of like what should you do with your brand? What do you need to do? What do you want to do with your brand? So understanding those two things, I think will bring a lot of clarity in terms of what is next for me.
I almost think that sometimes people are just like, branding is just like an aesthetic, or branding is just like the visual element of that. What are some of the things that maybe we don't know that are a part of branding, but aren't necessarily related to the aesthetic of the brand, but are strategic to the brand?
Everything. Like your brand touches everything from like your customer to even your staff internally, how they respond to customer service calls or how they communicate with external clients or parties. It all comes back to your brand. So depending on how you want that brand to be perceived to the outside world, it's also important to consider how is it being perceived internally because they're your brand ambassadors, your employees at the end of the day. So it very much touch everything that it has to do with your business.
I've always thought about this in terms of branding, but there's definitely like a psychology piece of this. How are people perceiving you? Is that something you also think about? Because I just know, like, as a branding person, I'm like, what is their experience with something? Is that fair to say? that
Oh,
you-
100%. We go through this very fun exercise when we work with a brand where we get them to choose like what type of food would your brand eat? What type of clothes would they wear? What animal would they be? What song would they be? What actor would they be? So it really gets them to think, put a creative hat on and think beyond like the boundaries of colors, fonts, and what your logo is. And it gets them to kind of let loose and think more creativity. So yeah, we do tap into that psychology aspect.
You started Posh 6 years ago, right?
Yes.
You said, how did this even come about? Like, how did you get started in this arena? What's your background?
I used to work in advertising. I was in house in Ottawa, which is Canada's capital, worked at two of the city's largest ad firms and got my experience there. But I wanted to branch out. I really saw a niche to work with small and mid sized businesses. Back then, this was pre COVID, okay? So pre COVID, you had to like physically get in your car and drive to a business owner to do business with them because no one would go on a virtual call, specifically business owners, because they were so busy. I had like my little geographic limit in my city that I literally got in my car, drove around, met with new business owners. I only had my laptop, my determination, and I was not taking no for an answer. I knocked on so many doors. And after knocking on 100, one opened. And this is kind of how our clientele started to come together. So, yes, we started very much door knocking and then COVID hit, but we were already set up and established at that point that we quickly pivoted to online. And that opened up our world to like so much bigger than just our immediate city. Then people were comfortable hopping on Zoom calls. We got clients from across Canada, and that's what we did for the first 3-4 years. We worked only with Canadian brands. And then we kind of realized that we were set up to work with anyone internationally at that point, and we had our systems and operation all finely tuned by then. So we opened up our doors, and now we work with brands across North America. So we have dozens of brands in the US as well, predominantly in the health and wellness space. That's really our niche. So think like med spas. We do a lot of like counseling, mental health, beauty. These are the types of industries that we work with. But yeah, we got started. It was just me at the beginning. So kind of a solopreneur, if you will. And then my team quickly grew, and now we are 7 on the team.
Congratulations on all of that. I'm always so fascinated when people come from almost like a bigger firm or almost like company and then start their own thing. What do you feel like those big advertising firms are doing when it comes to brand that you're kind of infusing into your company now?
I got access and experience to like so many cool brands. I was the lead on the NHL for some time, which is huge in Canada. I was also the lead on Hard Rock. They were established Hard Rock Casino. They were coming to Canada for the first time. I know their headquarters is in Florida, where not too far from where you're at actually. These are just some of the brands that I got access to work with. So here we're talking like multi-million dollar budgets, right? Like we're working with big brands, but that also comes with multiple rounds of approvals. So what we did, maybe the CEO could shut down at the 28th line of approval and change the green to a blue with no explanation. And that was very frustrating because like, there was a reason we put forward a certain color or a certain look or a certain element. Everything is very well thought out and there's a strategy behind the game plan. So I wanted to cut back on all those rounds of approval in the middle and go right to the decision maker. That's what I took from all of that. The strategy, the processes, what is possible with a large budget budget. And then my challenge was, how do I scale this back to small budgets for small and medium-sized business, right? We didn't have millions of dollars to work with in marketing. So that was my biggest challenge, but quickly pivoted and was able to let go of so many unnecessary steps along the way and get right from like action to result much quicker.
What do you think are, I think this is fascinating, by the way, the big, huge national brands and then infusing that into more of a small business setting. What do you think is the fat that the big brands have that you trimmed away? Like you don't really need to do if you don't have a big budget?
Oftentimes big brands are set in like dated processes and even like brand guidelines that were set 10, 15 years back that don't necessarily apply to today's digital landscape. It was very much built for a traditional newspaper, broadcasting, traditional media, but not necessarily pivoted to digital. Being able to shift a small business is so much easier and quicker than being able to shift a big corporation, because their logo, for instance, is printed on so many different assets across the country, even across the world. Sometimes it's more costly for them to be more adaptable to the marketplace, versus a small brand has that in their wheelhouse. They have the flexibility and the luxury to be more flexible and to pivot as the market shifts.
I love that because I think people don't recognize that. It's like, oh, I don't have a big budget, but it's like, no, wait, that could be a really big superpower for you
Yeah.
because then you're only focused on some of the things that matter. I know that you really have three main pillars that you focus on. Could you just kind of walk us through what those are that you really go into with your clients? And I'm also interested to know if you use these three pillars for certain types of businesses. Like I know that you were talking about more of brands that you're building versus like refreshing almost or rebranding. So walk us through it all.
Our three pillars are branding, website, and social media. So a client can come to us. We can either refresh their existing branding or build them up from the ground up. We would undergo a complete strategic brand identity. That can be anything from creating a brand guideline to their logo to how do these assets live on traditional billboards, signage, even at their facility. How does that live in the digital landscape? So social media and your website. So that would be step one. If they already have an established brand or don't want us to touch it, that's totally fine. Then we move into the website. We do a ton of landing pages, a ton of sales pages for digital courses. They were huge in 2024 and I think are going to be bigger this year. And we do a lot of lead generation websites and a ton of e-coms. So we work on three different platforms. Shopify is our preferred platform for anything e-com related. We work with Showit for landing pages and sales page, which is very easily integratable with most other website hosting provider, and also accessible to clients and affordable, which is so important to us. And the third platform that we use, which is my personal favorite, is Webflow. Are you familiar with Webflow by any chance?
So funny because we're redoing our website right now. And the girl who's redoing it was like, Webflow is amazing. And I'm like, what is this?
I love that. Okay, let me tell you why this is amazing. WordPress was the original website hosting provider for so many years, but other companies got up to speed on what was needed and how can they differentiate themselves from WordPress. And the reason we love Webflow is our clients don't have website background, but they want to be able to make edits on the fly without having to come to us for every small update, whether a team leaves, a new blog needs to go up, a job posting, whatever that website update is. We want clients to have the flexibility and the luxury to do that on their own. We're obviously always available to help if they don't want to touch it, but a lot of the time clients want to do it themselves. So that's why we love Webflow. I know you're all about visuals. It's also a visual first platform. So you have the ability to like design it. Your developer can't tell you, I can't do this, essentially, which is like music to my ears. You can literally design it however you want, as long as it passes accessibility tests. You have the creative freedom to like set it up how you want. And the third thing I will say I swear I have no brand affiliates with Webflow. I'm literally just like telling you why I love it so much. The third thing is that they're hosted on the Amazon cloud. So that means their server is as fast if you are in Miami, in Tokyo, or in London, UK. Your page site speed is going to be the same regardless of where you are in the world. So it's so great for growing brands or brands that have consumers in multiple different markets. So that's why we love Webflow so much. So we do a ton of websites. And then lastly, we manage social media for clients. So we'll do like the strategy for them, content creation, and then community management. And we'll do paid social ads for clients. So anywhere we run on Meta, TikTok for now. LinkedIn is huge. Pinterest is making a huge comeback, and I think it's going to be the biggest platform this year, which we're so excited for. And then we work with partners like yourself to actually create content for clients because we can't be everywhere for our clients. We work with trusted partner boots on the ground to capture the content, and then we turn that into actual content to be consumed, and we edit it and we post it for our clients.
I love this. And just to kind of bring in the visual aspect of this, how many visuals do you need from your clients in order to help facilitate the branding that you are doing? Because I don't know if you get this a lot, but I know we definitely see this because people work with us because of this issue. But when we talk to different, like even social media managers, website developers, they're like, my client came to me and they thought they had a lot of visuals, but they actually really have only 5 usable visuals. So, like, what is a usable visual and how much do you need of these visuals to actually execute these things in the way that you, the strategist, would want to execute them?
I always say less is better when it comes to photography and videography. So we have a bank to work with. If it's visuals for your website, like example, your hero section, which is the top banner of your website, you want it to be horizontal, right? You want it to be landscape. So the photography will need to be taken differently than if it is for a story on Instagram where you want it portrait mode. It's very important to understand where will those visuals live. So there's enough white space above or on the side, depending on where text or copy will be added. So that's a big one. In terms of quantity, it depends like how often they're showing up online as well. We always encourage our clients to do quarterly shoots, which I know aligns with your packages as well, because this way it's seasonal as well. We live in areas of the world where the weather changes seasonally. So we don't want to see a sweater in the summer and we don't want to see a tank top in December because it's just not the reality of some cities that we work with. So that's something that we also keep in mind. But it very much depends on the frequency of their content schedule and how often they're actually showing up. But I love to get more, and then we can just kind of trim through it. And we also have more options to be more creative versus if we only have a limited number of photos and videos to work with, we need to work with what is given. And sometimes that's very restrictive and not aligned with where we would love the brand to go.
It's so interesting how you almost get chained to a certain direction if you only have a certain amount of visuals. And I love that you talk about the seasonality of visuals. I don't think people think about that. It's like people want to relate to the visual that they're seeing with what's happening around them. So it seems obvious, but it's not. And I see that all the time. Obviously, when people come into the WorkPlay method, it's like, all right, they've got more than enough. But before that, it's like, dang, we've been using the same images since 2019 and you don't even look the same. You know what I mean? I love it. Okay. I'm really interested in understanding, making sure everyone listening understands where they're at in terms of their brand. So, are there symptoms or signs to know like a brand that needs to be built more? Or if you're in like more of a season where it's like, okay, we've got the company and we need to rebrand? Like, how do we know these triggers of when to invest in brand and at what point in our journey are we?
I just want to be clear that like a rebrand is not necessarily needed for everyone. I don't recommend it on a yearly basis. Typically, a brand will have a good life for 3 to 4 years before you give it a refresh. So I don't necessarily want to suggest a yearly rebrand because that will just confuse your audience and your customer at the end of the day because they're like, what the heck is going on? If you can't figure out your brand as a company, how will they trust you to figure it out for them? That's just something to keep in mind. But in terms of guidelines, if you feel you have enough variety when it comes to using different colors, brands, or style, if you are on social media, you definitely see what the visual aesthetic is. 5, 6 years ago, when I launched Posh Media, your feed was very much like it had to be aesthetically pleasing. We had our top senior graphic designers working on a little frame for Instagram that not many people saw because we were starting with new brands, right? So it was very much heavy in effort when it came to graphic design, and it had to be 100% on brand. You had to follow the brand guidelines. Now, if we fast forward to 2025, it is very much a photography lifestyle first platform and not necessarily heavy branded platform. And if you take a look at all of these big brands as well across the state or across the world, you'll see that they're not very much focused on their brand identity when it comes to like colors, fonts. Yes, there is some consistency, and that is like the core element. If you are to do a brand shoot or if you are to add some graphic elements, make sure it's the same font for every graphic, or you have a couple fonts that you work with, a header, a body, a subtitle font, and then make sure your colors are consistent as well. You don't necessarily need your logo placed on all of those graphics. If you have those visual cues, people will start to identify your brand with this graphic. They'll realize it's you right away. And that's the ultimate goal that we want our clients to get to.
That makes a lot of sense. So I actually want to dive into this idea of like, okay, the aestheticness of what Instagram used to be versus more of this organic lifestyle look. When do we know when to use the aesthetic versus the organic lifestyle? Because honestly, people will come to us and they'll be like, is it okay if like my grid is messy? And honestly, I think it is where it's going, right? But when do we need to pull in the aesthetic and versus when do we not have to care so much?
Yeah, it's funny. I kid you not, 5 years ago, messy would not be okay. But
Yeah.
now it is expected. And I always like to use the word curated messy. So messy is okay, but as long as it's curated and branded, there's some strategy behind it. So definitely like would not recommend two same colors back to back on the grid because that will still clash. And when someone who is not familiar with your brand lands on your feed, you still want to give them the best first impression. So as long as we're following those regular brand guidelines, we're using the same style of photography. If your images are very like light and airy, don't go put a moody photo right beside it because that will just clash with the aesthetic and it will actually reverse anything that you've worked towards to build that brand reputation and that brand awareness and recognition, right? That is very important.
It's so funny. Curated messy. I love it. I hope everyone's listening. As far as like all of these things, to someone who's more of a logical person, who's not really a creative person, who understand that it's important, but it's not the top priority. Why should they care about this? Like, why should they care about having a curation? Why should they care about investing in visuals plus the consistent fonts plus the colors? What is that leading factor, do you think?
For some brands, curation is not needed. And for some brands, it is. We're talking business brands. So when it comes to personal branding, I think there's definitely more flexibility on that front where you can have more fun. You can test and trial the market to see like what is landing and what isn't. But when it comes to a business brand, then we're a bit more restricted in brand guidelines from that front.
I totally agree because I just even think about WorkPlay Branding and then my own personal brand. People will be like, oh, but you posted this on your personal. I'm like, no, it's completely different. But yeah, I totally agree. Why do you think the first impression is so important? So you had mentioned like, okay, we need to keep this curated because the first impression happens. What happens in a first impression? Like, what's the downside of having a bad first impression when they're seeing your brand online versus a really good one? What are the pros and cons?
It's all part of the customer journey experience, right? So if they have a bad first impression, they most likely will not get to the next stage of that customer journey. If they have a good first impression, then they'll go and check your website, check your Google reviews, then they'll go and seek out testimonials and they'll start to follow you just to get their own taste and make up their own idea of who you are as a brand. And then eventually they'll reach out and inquire about your services if they're looking for at that time.
Is there a way to measure their first impressions, or is there a way that you guys do it on your end? Like, how do you know that you're getting the first impression right?
So if a client of ours lands a new customer or a new client, we always ask, how did you hear about us? So if it's social media or referral, and that will give us an indicator of like, this is where we need to spend our most effort when it comes to lead generation. So that's one. And the other one is just to ask people, what did you think about this? Like, ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask your community or ask your audience, what do they like? What do they not like? Because at the end of the day, we are here to serve our communities. So we want to make sure that what we're creating and what we're putting out aligns with what they're looking for.
That makes sense. When you say referral, referral is such a big word, right? It's because when someone refers someone else, I would assume that the referral is also doing their due diligence on the company. And so it's like, where are they going? Well, they're probably going to the website or the social, one of those two places first. So it's almost like, even if someone says referral, where are they researching? I can't imagine that it's through a referral and then they don't do any research and then they just blindly trust the referral. But I always think that the referral is even more amplified signal that your first impression has to still be really good.
It really is. In my experience, a referral is either a client who has a referral is someone who has worked with you in the past or is currently working with you. So they have their own experience of what it is working with you. So you've kind of been vetted and trusted. And so if they refer you to someone else, they have a warmer introduction and they might skip a couple steps along the customer journey.
Right. Yeah. This has been such an amazing conversation. I always ask the question in terms of like our workplay members and the process that they're going through on a quarterly basis. Why do you believe it's important to create those quarterly visuals? Why is that important? And also, what do you think our workplay members should be thinking about as they create those visuals through our process?
The number one question is, where is this going to live? It is so heartbreaking to see someone do this beautiful shoot, invest so much time and energy and funds into a photo shoot or a content collection day, and them just not doing anything with it. So make sure that you know where those images or videos are going to live before heading into it, and be open to whatever happens on that day. I know you probably have a shot list going into the day, but sometimes it will inspire another shot or another setting or another outfit. So just be open to what could and might happen on that particular day.
Thank you for saying that because I almost feel like the serendipity of it all, of things going wrong, but then something better happening. Like you've got to allow that to happen.
And it's part of the magic.
Totally. I mean, there's so many workplace shoots that I can think of where it's like this location didn't work, but then we found something so much better. We couldn't have planned for it. It was like just only available to you in that moment. And I also really agree with where is this going to live? So you don't want to get a gallery back and not know where to implement it. I just think you are a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for coming on our show. Where can everyone connect with you and find you and see all of the beautiful work that you're doing?
Well, thank you for creating the space for all of us know and understand the importance of branding, but also content creation because it has everything to do with your brand nowadays. So thanks for having me. I'm on Instagram at MONE Boudreau, BOUDREAU. I will spell it out because that is French. And you can also find my business at Posh Media CA.
Thank you so much, Monica.